My name is Sarah, and I have a story that has haunted me for years. I never believed in curses or the supernatural until I encountered the doll that changed everything. It was more than just a doll. It was a vessel of dread, a thing that seemed to breathe malice. Most people have heard of Annabelle, but what I experienced with my doll, which I've come to call simply the doll, was far worse. It all began when I was a child. I was 10 years old when my grandmother passed away. She had lived in a small, creaky house filled with all sorts of oddities. But one item stood out to me: a porcelain doll with a cracked face and empty eyes. My grandmother had always warned me never to touch it. "It's not just a doll, Sarah," she would say, her voice trembling slightly. "It's cursed." I thought she was simply trying to scare me, a way to keep me from playing with something that had belonged to her. But her warnings echoed in my mind long after she was gone. After the funeral, my parents decided to clear out her house. It was a somber day, filled with memories and the bittersweet scent of old wood and dust. I wandered around, lost in thought, until I stumbled upon the doll sitting on a shelf in the attic. It looked so lonely, its glassy eyes fixed on me as if it were waiting for someone to acknowledge its presence. Against my better judgment, I reached for it. It felt cold and heavy in my hands, and I could almost hear my grandmother's voice warning me to put it down. But something compelled me to take it home. Once we settled back into our own house, I placed the doll on my nightstand. I thought it would be a nice tribute to my grandmother, a way to keep her memory alive. But soon after, strange things began to happen. At first, it was just little things. I would hear soft whispers in the night, almost like laughter, but when I woke up, no one was there. My parents brushed it off as my imagination, but I knew what I heard. Then one evening, I woke up to find the doll had moved. It was no longer facing the wall, but staring right at me. I froze, my heart pounding. I convinced myself that I had simply turned it the night before, but deep down, I felt a chill run down my spine. I decided to put it in the closet, hoping that would help. But the next morning, it was back on the nightstand, its expression unchanged, yet somehow more sinister. Days turned into weeks, and the occurrences escalated. I started to have nightmares. In them, the doll would come to life, its porcelain skin cracking open to reveal a darkness within. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, yet somehow unable to shake the feeling that it was watching me. My friends began to notice my unease. They would ask me what was wrong, and I would brush it off, not wanting to sound foolish. But I could feel their eyes on the doll, a mix of curiosity and fear. One night, I was having a sleepover with my best friend, Emily. We were sprawled out on my bed, talking about school and boys when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her gaze fixed on the doll. "Is that thing really cursed?" she asked, her voice low. I shrugged, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I had never told her about the strange happenings. "It's just a doll," I said, but even I didn't believe it. As the night wore on, we decided to play a game of truth or dare. When it was Emily's turn, she dared me to ask the doll a question. I hesitated, but the challenge hung in the air, and I felt compelled to prove that I wasn't scared. I turned to the doll, its lifeless eyes glimmering in the dim light. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights flickered, and a cold breeze swept through the room. Emily gasped, and I felt my heart race. "Let's just stop," I said, but it was too late. The next day, I found Emily in tears. She told me she had a nightmare where the doll was sitting at the foot of her bed, whispering her name. I tried to comfort her, but deep down, I was terrified. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew that whatever was happening was not just in my head. It was real. As the weeks passed, I began to notice changes in myself. I became more withdrawn, plagued by anxiety and an overwhelming sense of dread. The whispers grew louder, and I started to see shadows moving in the corners of my vision. I couldn't escape the feeling that the doll was somehow connected to it all. I tried to get rid of it, but every time I attempted to throw it away, it would mysteriously return to my nightstand, as if it had a will of its own. Eventually, I confided in my parents, who dismissed my fears as typical childhood imagination. They didn't understand the weight of my terror. One night, in a fit of desperation, I took the doll and locked it in the attic, hoping that would put an end to my nightmares. But the next morning, I found it back on my nightstand again, its expression unchanged, yet somehow even more menacing. Feeling hopeless, I turned to the internet, searching for stories of cursed dolls. I discovered that the doll had once belonged to a girl who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago, and whispers of her spirit lingering within it sent chills down my spine. I learned about others who had encountered similar dolls, but nothing prepared me for what was to come. One evening, after a particularly vivid nightmare, I woke up to find the doll sitting on my chest. Its cold porcelain face was inches from mine, and I could feel its eyes boring into my soul. I screamed, pushing it off me, and it clattered to the ground. I was shaking, my heart racing as I scrambled to my feet. I grabbed a blanket and ran to my parents' room, waking them in a panic. They were groggy and confused, struggling to understand what I was saying. My father finally agreed to come check on the doll, but when we entered my room, it was gone. The doll was nowhere to be found. I searched everywhere, my heart pounding in my chest. I was convinced it had vanished, that maybe I had finally rid myself of its curse. But just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, I heard a soft giggle coming from the closet. My heart sank. I approached slowly, my hands trembling as I gripped the doorknob. When I opened the door, there it was, sitting on the shelf, as if it had never moved at all. That was the breaking point for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I begged my parents to help me. They finally agreed to take the doll to a local paranormal investigator, a woman known for her work with cursed objects. I felt a glimmer of hope as we drove to her office, but it was quickly overshadowed by dread. What if the investigator couldn't help? What if the doll was too powerful? When we arrived, the investigator welcomed us with a warm smile, but I could see the concern in her eyes as she examined the doll. She took it in her hands, her expression turning serious. "This doll is indeed cursed," she said, her voice steady. "It carries a dark energy, and it seems to be feeding off your fear." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What can we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The investigator explained that we needed to perform a cleansing ritual to break the curse. It sounded simple enough, but I could feel the weight of the doll's presence, lingering like a shadow. That night, we gathered in the investigator's office, surrounded by candles and crystals. She led us through the ritual, chanting words I didn't understand. I could feel the air thickening around us, and I closed my eyes, focusing on the flickering candlelight. As the investigator's voice rose and fell, I felt a strange energy enveloping me, a mix of fear and hope. When the ritual was complete, I opened my eyes, feeling lighter. The doll was placed in a box and sealed tightly. I thought I was finally free, but the relief was short-lived. That night, I had the worst nightmare yet. The doll was back, its cracked face grinning at me, and I could hear the whispers growing louder, echoing in my mind. I woke up screaming, my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was still with me, even in its box. In the days that followed, I felt a sense of foreboding that I couldn't explain. I would hear the whispers in the dark, and shadows danced at the corners of my vision. I felt trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape. Eventually, my family decided to move. They thought a fresh start might help, and I longed for it. We packed our things and left the house behind, but I couldn't escape the feeling that the doll had followed me. I would often wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I could hear it whispering my name. In our new home, I tried to put the past behind me. I focused on school and friends, but the shadows never fully dissipated. I would catch glimpses of something out of the corner of my eye, and the whispers continued to haunt me. It was as if the doll had become a part of me, a dark shadow that followed my every move. Years passed, and I grew up, but the memories of the doll lingered. I often wondered if it had truly been cursed, or if I had simply imagined it all. I tried to convince myself that it was just a childhood fear, but deep down, I knew the truth. The doll had changed me, shaped my fears, and left a mark on my soul that I couldn't erase. Now, as an adult, I often find myself reflecting on that time. I've moved on with my life, but the memories of the doll still linger in the back of my mind. I've shared my story with friends, but most dismiss it as a tall tale. They don't understand the weight of fear that comes from something so seemingly innocent. I've come to accept that some things are better left unspoken. The doll remains a part of my past, a reminder of the darkness that can exist in the most unexpected places. I've learned to embrace the shadows, to find strength in the fear that once consumed me. But I will never forget the lesson it taught me that sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones we cannot see, the whispers that linger in the dark corners of our minds.